All right, I'm looking at my 1985 250 ES Big Red here. That's a 250cc engine. The E stands for electric start and the S stands for shaft driven. So looking at the front here and the way this was originally designed, this headlamp could be pulled off and used as a working light. And it had about 10 foot of this cord here, and this is just a standard extension cord type electrical cord. It's got 3 conductors in it. It's got a high beam, low beam, and a ground, and it had about 10 foot of cable. And basically the way it was designed, when your headlamp was back on the bike, that 10 foot of cord would stay in here. And this area right here, this little plastic box right here, was your fuse box. The problem was all of these wires here, and you're talking about 4 electrical connectors. You got one for the headlight. You got one for your kill switch. You got one for, I forget, but anyway, you had 4 electrical connectors, 2 fuse. So all of this had to try to go in this little square area right here. And you're not talking about very much space. So basically, you would have to slide this off and try to make fit all of these wires in this little area. And you can see how big this is compared to this area. And then you would have to try to slide this back on top of it. And it was just a poor design. I couldn't slide this back on top without causing something to come unplugged. And I'm not going to be taking the headlamp off and using it like that. That's a pretty good idea for its day. I'm assuming back then you didn't have, an 85, you didn't have a lot of lithium ion battery flashlights, headlamps, and whatnot. So I don't really need that. I'm gonna redesign this. So I'm gonna get rid of this cup. And you can see there on the bottom a little clip where the wires were run underneath. I'm gonna get rid of this, and I fabbed me up a little piece of metal. And if this isn't thick enough, I'll make me a thicker one, but I'm gonna put this here. And I've got me basically just a little plastic electronics project box. Something you can get anywhere, get it on Amazon, eBay. And it is waterproof, it is sealed. Once you put the lid on here, you can turn these screws to lock it down. And it's got a seal on it here that'll seal. Of course, that really doesn't matter that much anyway, because I had to cut a hole in it in order to be able to get my wires in there. I painted it black, as you can see. And the way that I actually cut this, I took my heat gun. I got a 350 watt heat gun. This guy right here, this is something I inherited from my grandfather, so there's no telling how old it is, but it's a Weller, good name brand. And you can see that it is a, looks like 325 watts. Weller D550. So I took this. Of course, when you squeeze the trigger, this gets hot. This is replaceable. You can replace this end. And instead of trying to cut it with a knife, I just melted it out. Then I took and cut the sharp edges off with a good utility knife, sanded them down, made sure they don't have any sharp edges. So what I'm gonna do, now that I've got my piece of metal that I fabbed up, I'm gonna screw it down And I'm going to mount this project box in here. I'll screw my project box to that piece of metal that I fabbed. And I have much more room now for all of my electrical connections. Now, do you have a place where water could come in? Yes. I'm not planning on taking this thing across a creek and submerging it. Trust me, I wouldn't dare do that. I've refurbished this whole bike. It's taken me quite a long time, so I'm not planning on doing something that extreme. So now I've got more room, and all of my wires here, they will comfortably fit. And basically, the way that these wires are originally routed, so got my lid back on top. So that's the way that'll be, and that will sit underneath the headlamp. Everything fits nice and comfortably. I've already tested it a few times. And the way that all of these wires were originally mounted from the factory, let me say originally routed from the factory, is just like I have them. They would go into the fuse box, turn around and come back out of the fuse box through this opening between your, let's just be the left side of the bike, the left fork and the center frame. So they would come from the bike. They're all in this wiring harness. Once they go into the fuse box, they would split into their separate cables, and they would have some slack so you could turn your bike. You know, got to keep that in mind. Make sure you give yourself some slack so you got enough for your to turn your bike. And of course, when I'm done, I'll have all this tie wrapped up out of the way. And so that's my idea for replacing that fuse box. It's something I suggest. I also removed completely from the bike the wiring harness, and it was filled with mud and grime and grit, and I just, it runs here under the fuel tank, comes back out here, and then it goes through these couplers and stuff. I have it temporarily jumper wired to my New Racing CDI. That's a whole nother story there, but basically, if you have an early 85, and this was manufactured in 11 of 84, but it's an 85 model. If you have an early 85, you are going to have that round plug CDI. And buddy, when you get into that world, you are about to bite off quite a bit, because you can't find this baby. Now, they do make one for the 200, which was 1984, was the 200, but it's smaller. It has a round plug, but there's only 5 pins. This is a 6-pin round plug, and from what I understand, that 84 smaller 5-pin CDI won't work on a 250 1985. This has a bad capacitor in it. I finally determined that after quite a bit of work. I thought it had a short in the cable where the plug connected to the CDI. This is the plug, and you can take with these connectors, there's a little pin on these. You can see that little pin at the very top of the wires. Look at the very top, there's a little pin, and you push that little pin down and you can pull it out. You can pull that connector out of the plug. Now, this one is kind of unique because you have 6 of them, plus you have a rubber grommet. So you have to, from this side, get a nice small little tool, some kind of little pin or something, sewing needle or whatever you need, You reach in there and you release one, and you pull that one back. Let's say I do black and yellow. I would release him, then I would pull just the black and yellow. Then I would do the next one, pull, 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 pull. Each one of the 6 wires individually till you get them all released from here. Then you can pull the whole robber grommet out. Anyway, I thought I had a short in here, but I didn't. There was no short in here. So I finally figured out, after plugging and unplugging this thing, what it was causing was an intermittent loss of fire. And so you can go by the service manual, which gives you some resistance values on your coil. And you can take where your coil is connected right here and measure the resistance back to ground. That checked out okay. But what didn't check out okay was I took my meter and I checked to see if I was getting voltage to my coil, and I wouldn't be. I wasn't getting the voltage to the coil. If not getting voltage to the coil, you'll never get fire. All the coil is a step-up transformer. So I'd have that intermittent loss of fire. Kept playing around with it. Eventually I figured out all I had to do is squeeze this. If I would squeeze the outside of this case just a touch, it would lose fire. Now I'd have to position it in just the right way. You know, it'd be plugged up to the wiring harness on the bike. And I'd have to move it around all kind of different ways, get it in just the right position. I'd have fire. I'd have that voltage going to my coil. Take and squeeze this, I'd lose that fire. So, researching online, I eventually figured out through someone else's YouTube video that this new racing CDI is the CDI you can use to replace that CDI. And it works. But guess what? Glad I ordered 2 of them, because the first one I ordered did not work. Ordered 2 of them from the exact same vendor on Amazon. Well, the first one worked. I'm sorry, the first one didn't work, but the second one did. So that's something else to keep in mind. If you've tried one and it didn't work, you might want to get you a second one. Try it again. I'm thinking about ordering some extra ones, trying them out on my bike, making sure that they work. And if they work, I'm going to sell them as known good units. That way it would save people the trouble of having to order one. It's almost like you got a 50-50 shot when you order one. You don't know if it's good or bad. So anyway, that's my plan, to replace the fuse box, put a larger fuse box in here. And might be something you want to consider. Thanks.